Black is back.
Black is back.
Black is back.
Black is back. Black is back.
Black is back.
Black is
Black is
back.
back.
Black is back.
Black is back.
Black is back. And the rallying call is Black is back. And all of those people who wanted to be mobilized.
All right, I came with lots of paper. You know that my talks are fueled by paper. And it says on the program that I'm supposed to talk about the history of African people in the U.S. electoral process. But I'm not going to talk about that because that's too big a subject for our purposes this morning. What I want to talk about is not the history of the black vote, but I think we should be examining the why of this subject, why black folks vote the way that they do today, and how we can change that kind of electoral behavior and black folks' political behavior in general. I think we need to explore the question that is posed by all of us, that O'Malley was posing for us in many different ways. Under what circumstances and to what purpose should black radicals run for office? That's the essential question. The first thing that we must do in any discussion of black radicals and electoral politics is to describe black voters. Are they, black voters, really radical, whether they know it or not? And that's a very important distinction, whether they know it or not, because the corporate media insists on using the same terminology, the same phrases, the same words to describe black people politically that they use to describe white people politically, even though black people live on an entirely different political plane than white people and speak an entirely different political language, at least when we're not in mixed company. White pollsters, when they bother to do actual in-depth surveys of black people, and that's not too often, but when they do these surveys, they insist on asking the black respondents, the people that they get to take part in these surveys, they insist on asking the black respondents to describe themselves as either liberal or very liberal or moderate or conservative or very conservative. And those are the same terms, the same words that they use in describing white people. They ask white people to describe themselves using those same terms. But in the United States, this is a ridiculous proposition. In the United States, race has everything to do with where one stands politically. Race runs the political show in the United States. That's why in Mississippi you got 90% of white people voting for the Republican Party. That's why we have a white man's party, the Republican Party. And that's why black folks think that they must belong to the Democratic Party because it's not the white man's party. So race dictates politics in the United States. And so there can be no real sameness. This is an illusion. This is a distortion. This is a mask that's put over politics. There can be no sameness between blacks that call themselves liberal and white people that call themselves the same thing, liberal. A huge percentage of the white people who think that they are liberal think so because they believe that they favor civil rights for black people. But virtually all black people, of course, favor civil rights for black people. Does that make them liberal in the same way that it makes white people liberal? Does that indicate that somehow black people share some deep political commonality with self-selected white liberals just because black folks want civil rights for their own people. That is nonsense. It's a criteria that does not really, in reality, exist. It does not mean that there is a sameness of purpose. It is a nonsensical term. The pollsters, the fact that pollsters use the term conservative, and they do, conservative, to refer to some black people is even more ridiculous. Black people in these self-selected surveys, the black folks who describe themselves as conservatives bear no resemblance whatsoever to white conservatives. White conservatives are overwhelmingly marked by their deep racism. That is why they are right-wing. So how could we have a whole class of black people that we would call conservative? It does not make sense. It's not based in reality. The reality is that black people inhabit an entirely different political spectrum from white people, and there is no matchup. When a black person says that she is conservative in her own political views, she means that she is conservative in relationship to other black people. It has nothing to do with the common usage of the term in U.S. media and in U.S. mainstream, as they say, political discussion. In my studies, I found that black people that describe themselves as conservative are actually likely to be more to the left than white people who describe themselves as liberal. So, I think that we should, of course, dispense, if we can, with that term liberal, but we should use the terms left and right in relationship to black politics, because we do have a left in our political spectrum, and we do have a right in our political spectrum. But this pertains to our spectrum. The black political spectrum itself is way to the left of the white political spectrum. That's because the black political spectrum has evolved over time in opposition to the politics of white people in the United States. By necessity, we are to the left of them. Most often, black folks don't use the term left when we're talking about our own politics outside of mixed company. That's because, one, it is super dangerous to be both black and left in the United States. And also because left is not a sufficient definition for us. Our struggle is much more complex than what is usually referred to as left. We are trying to get freedom as a people in the belly of the white settler beast. And just saying that we're on the left does not add anything to that conversation. Just being left, just being radical, does not explain what we have to do. And besides that, the white left has not done much to make them subjects of emulation anyway. Not the least because they keep insisting that they are the genuine and the only left in the country, even though their numbers are pitiful, even though they didn't burn down any cities, and even though their leaders are not regularly assassinated. But they insist, yes, we are the left and y'all are something else. Back in 2005, that was the year of Katrina, there was a white lefty think tank in San Francisco that decided that it was going to do a scientific study of what cities in the United States were most left, where these various cities, they lined up 236 of them, where they stood on what they think the political spectrum is. So they put together a model that they thought would determine which cities in this list of 236 were liberal or conservative. Those were the terms that they were using. And the social scientist who ran that think tank, he later confessed that he was sure from the very beginning, before he even put this model in progress, he was sure what the results of that survey would be. He was sure that Berkeley, California, and Cambridge, Massachusetts, and Ann Arbor, Michigan would be right at the top of the list of the most left-wing, or he used the term, liberal cities in the country. And so they ran the numbers. He was a good social scientist. He used all the protocols that he would employ in this kind of survey. And he was shocked when the numbers finally came out. He found out that the most left-wing city or liberal city in the country was Detroit, 81% black. And then it went on down the line. It was Gary, Indiana, and Washington, D.C., and Flint, Michigan, and Cleveland, Ohio, and Baltimore, and Philadelphia, and Birmingham, Alabama. Those were the cities that were the most progressive according to his scientific study. And he was forced to conclude that the whole map of the left, or liberals, in the United States was a black map. And there were hardly any white cities in it, much less those three that he thought would be the top ones, and certainly not San Francisco, where he lived. But, you know, I got to stop deriding this guy for using the term liberal, because in terms of the results of the voting that black folks did in Detroit and in Cleveland and in Philadelphia and in all those cities that showed up at the top of his list, the results of that voting were to create liberals in positions of power, black liberals largely in those cities. So whether the black voters were liberals or not, the product of their voting had a liberal result. So here we are, the most left-wing constituency in the country, but we can't measure, based on our participation in the electoral system, just how left or how radical that constituency really is. We have other ways to measure black people's political beliefs and where we stand on the political spectrum. But we can't measure that by the results of our votes. Why is that? It's because of the dead weight of the Democratic Party. We pour all our votes into that institution and the crap comes out liberal or worse. But that doesn't have anything to say about our political beliefs, about our aspirations. It has to do with that soiled, funky, no-good machinery that we use when we enter the political arena. The Democratic Party is hegemonic in the black community. It infests all of our institutions, our churches and our fraternities and our sororities. Everywhere you go, it's Democratic. Your family, Democratic. My family, Democratic. It's an infestation. It has us locked into this two corporate party system, which for us is a one-party system. There is no two-party system for us. And as a result of that, we don't just muzzle our own political inclinations when we go to the polls. We actually vote against our left-wing instincts in the Democratic primaries, because in those primaries, we vote for the Democratic candidate that we think is most likely to beat the Republican, the white man's party. We base our vote on the likelihood of a Democratic victory and not on the basis of whether that candidate reflects our views at all. And we show up at the polls in those primaries not as the left-wing constituency, but as the scared as hell constituency, just worrying about Republicans and not even thinking about our own agenda. Our sole purpose in political life, as far as the Democrats are concerned, is to beat the white man's party, the Republicans. And many of us believe that that is our sole purpose in political life as well. That kind of behavior eviscerates our politics. All of our emancipatory and liberationist energies, all of our aspirations are smothered in our submission to being the Democratic Party's most loyal constituency. There is no us in that behavior. This is the same party in most of the cities that we live in that oversees the police repression and the mass incarceration that has held us in a vice for the past two generations, ever since we became good Democrats. The mass incarceration regime that followed our Black liberation movement has been almost entirely presided over at the local level by the Democratic Party, and yet that is our party. Does that mean that we have to take credit for mass Black incarceration? Yeah, from one angle, you'd have to say that. Wherever we wind up, the Democrats will be counting on our vote, because we give it to them, and we have to break that cycle. That's why we're here this weekend, to explore what is possible and what is promising in the electoral arena and what is not promising and unwise. I'm going to say this as emphatically as I can. Everything that we do inside or outside the electoral arena must be with the intention of breaking the hegemony of the Democratic Party among our people. If that is not topmost on our minds, then we must be making the wrong moves. The Democratic Party is the bloody hand of the U.S. ruling class. And yet that democratic bloody hand is intimate among us. It's in our families and in our institutions. And we have to cast that out of our community. We have, and I've always said this, a largely internal struggle. And we lose sight of the enemy, not just within, but right next to us, if we keep on looking over at that white man's party over there and saying everything we do is to defeat that. The Black is Back coalition is on record favoring proportional representation. We talked about that, I believe, about three years ago, and it was by consensus agreed that in principle we're for proportional representation in voting, because that would, if enacted, and there was a time when a number of U.S. cities did have proportional representation, that would hopefully have the effect of loosening the Democratic Party's noose around the Black community. Proportional representation has a positive history among Black people. Cincinnati, Ohio, got its first 2 Black city councilmen in the 1950s, and it was because of proportional representation. In New York City, back in the 40s, there were 2 communists sitting on the city council. One of them was Black, Ben Davis of the Communist Party from Harlem. But in Cincinnati, the opponents of proportional representation used race to destroy that system, that experiment there. In New York City, they used race and a Red Scare to destroy proportional representation. Who is the they? The Democratic Party. They were the ones who were most opposed to proportional representation. And there's a reason that the Democrats are most opposed to proportional representation. The Democrats believe, and it's true, that under the current system, they have a right to every vote that is to the left of the Republicans. And it doesn't matter to them how far to the right the Republicans are. Wherever the Republicans stake their banner, then the Democrats think that they have a right to everybody who's to the left of that. If you're to the left of Attila the Hun, they think that you owe your vote to the Democratic Party. The Democrats want the communist vote. They just don't want a communist party. They want the black nationalist vote, and they get it every election. The Democrats blame Ajamu Baraka and Jill Stein for Hillary Clinton losing the election. But they still want Ajamu Baraka's vote, and they want Jill Stein's vote. They think they got a right to it. They think they are entitled to our vote. And many of our people, unfortunately, also feel that they are obligated to vote for the Democrats. The Democrats have a monopoly on black people, which is why it is a one-party system for us. So how can we talk about democratic politics or the existence of some kind of democratic mechanisms in our community when it's a one-party state? That doesn't make any sense. If you want to engage in electoral politics, and if for purposes of ballot access, and in many places it's damn near impossible to get on a ballot unless you're going to be, well, you can't be a Republican unless you want to be a Democrat. You must become, as I believe Brother Charles Barron is, you must become a nominal or technical Democrat. And at the same time, you must declare war on the Democratic Party and work for its destruction. And I believe that Brother Barron is also doing that. In terms of this entire rigged, money-drenched political system, our job is to make the street talk and to make this system ultimately irrelevant. That's how we ultimately get community control of the police. That's how we halt gentrification of our neighborhoods. We do that by allowing the street to speak truth to power. All of us, however, here do agree that some valuable political work can be accomplished in the electoral arena. Voting is not mandatory in the United States. It is in some countries. I was just talking to a young woman from Ecuador. You can't even get a driver's license unless you're registered to vote and can show, if you're old enough, that you did vote in Ecuador. But in the United States, it's not mandatory. However, the capitalist media, all of the organs of the ruling class, makes it mandatory that all of us follow the elections, that we follow what goes on in this two-party system, whether we vote or not. So we're being indoctrinated and acculturated and socialized to the monopoly, whether we vote or not, even in those states where they keep us from voting, we are still being propagandized by the process that is controlled by these two corporate parties. Never imagine that electoral politics is a path to actual governance by radicals. We may win some offices, but not to governance. Because what we want to do is illegal. Based on every rule in this system. We want to destroy the rule of money and the rule of property. We want to destroy the imperial armed forces and the police that keep the rule of property and money in place. And if that's not unconstitutional, I don't know what is. So we're not going to govern as a result of some electoral process. But nevertheless, go ahead, try and use the system, but don't let the system use you. Our people, just like everybody else in the country, pay attention to the elections. And the election process never stops. That 2016 election has not stopped, and yet the 2018 has already begun. It's a nonstop thing, and I don't think this year is an aberration. It's going to be like this from now on. They just intensify the propaganda. We need to see all of this electoraling as propaganda campaigns by the two parties who are the ruling class. And now it is a nonstop affair. Elections, therefore, however, since people are paying attention to them, and I think this is 90% of the reason that we're having this conversation. Our people pay attention. We talk about the ins and outs and ups and downs of this election. And since our people are paying attention to it, we have to pay attention. But logically, that requires that all of our electoral efforts involve us putting forward the same radical, self-determinationist proposals and program that we do in our regular work. That is, we do not change our program. We don't change our principle. We don't change our presentation because we are engaged in electoral work. We should not run except as an extension of our grassroots non-electoral activities. If you are envisioning some kind of electoral campaign that requires an interruption with your regular activities, especially if they have been going well, then you are making a mistake. You are taking a wrong turn. And you have some very wrong ideas about what is at the end of that electoral road. The African People's Socialist Party last year conducted an electoral campaign in St. Petersburg, Florida. That campaign was, in fact, an extension and an expansion, it appeared to me, of their existing political program. They think that it was a success, and I think it was a success. It enhanced the party's ongoing political work. It gave a workout to the Black is Back 19-point program for black self-determination, which was employed as a central document in that campaign. They had a chance to see how regular people in an electoral arena would react to these 19 points. What they learned in that campaign may help us improve on the 19 points, because it ain't no Bible. We can improve upon it, but we need to see how the folks reacted to it. We haven't done that exercise, but I'm sure that we will at some point. Most importantly, the brothers and sisters in St. Petersburg believed that they raised the people's consciousness, and that is the basis of struggle, raising the people's consciousness. And they did that by putting forward a radical program. We believe our people are ready to hear a radical program. We believe that they are hungry for transformation in their lives. And the polls show that this is the case. See, the white man says so too. Those polls. The polls show that young people are especially hungry, but black people in general are hungry for a radical program. The polls have showed that a plurality of millennials, 44%, would rather live in a socialist country than in a capitalist country. Only 42% of millennials, and that's millennials of all races, only 42% of millennials want to live in a capitalist country. That is an indication of widespread discontent when we think of the history of this country and socialism having been yesterday a dirty word. And yet we have pluralities of young people of all races selecting that word as something that is positive. That poll, by the way, that was taken was commissioned by an avowedly anti-communist organization. So this is not a bunch of boosterism. They didn't pay for these kinds of results. A Gallup poll found that millennials were tied in terms of favoring socialism or capitalism. There wasn't any breakdown in that Gallup poll. Of course, they know, but they won't tell us what the breakdown is. We can be sure, however, that black millennials were even more favorable to socialism, even though they didn't tell us what the figures were. And the reason that we can be sure is because there was another poll, and this one was commissioned by a libertarian organization. And that poll showed that black people of all ages favor socialism by 55%. Blacks are most in favor of socialism, according to this poll. They are followed by Hispanics, 45% of whom favor socialism. Only 29% of white people want socialism, according to this poll, which confirms that white people are the backward element in U.S. society. Despite their pretensions to being the leaders of the left. Obviously, they are not very good leaders. But we in Black America have no excuse for not putting forward a radical program like our 19-point program for self-determination. Our people are receptive to a radical program. If electoral activity enhances your ability to speak on self-determination and socialism to our people, then you should do it. That should be a go-ahead to at least explore some kind of electoral project. If it distracts from what you are doing, you should not do electoral activity. And the reason is that elections are not the victory. We all know that. Revolution is the victory. Power to the people.
Black is back.
Black is back.
Black is back.
Black is back. Black is back.
Black is back.
Black is
Black is
back.
back.
Black is back.
Black is back.
Black is back.
Back.
And the rallying call is Black is back.